Have you ever wondered what happened to MG-42 gunners who finally surrendered after mowing down literally thousands of Allied soldiers on open beaches? We're going to tell you what happened to them, alongside the lesser-known stories from the biggest military operation in human history. June 6, 1944, 0630 hours, the coast of Normandy, France. Thousands of Allied soldiers are about to storm 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. Waiting for them in concrete bunkers are German soldiers manning the most feared weapon of World War II, the MG-42 machine gun, Hitler's Buzzsaw, Hitler's zipper, Hitler's lawnmower. The weapon that fires 1,200 rounds per minute. That sounds like ripping canvas. That can cut a man in half. For the next 12 hours, these guns will kill thousands of Allied soldiers, turn beaches into killing fields, nearly stop the invasion before it begins. But what happened to the men behind those guns? What did the Allies do to the gunners who caused so much death? This is that story. The story of the MG-42 on D-Day, the men who fired it, the men who died trying to silence it, and what happened when the two sides finally met face to face. Let's first set the stage. Once the MG-42 first appeared in 1942, it quickly became the go-to machine gun for German troops. It followed them all the way from North Africa to the Eastern Front and into almost every defensive position they held. The specifications are legendary. Rate of fire, 1,200 rounds per minute, 20 rounds per second. Effective range, 1,000 meters. Maximum range, 3,000 meters. The gun could fire an entire 250-round belt in 12 seconds. The barrel would glow red hot. Crews were trained to change barrels every few hundred rounds to prevent melting. The sound was distinctive, a tearing, continuous roar. Veterans said it sounded like ripping canvas or a chainsaw cutting through wood. Allied soldiers learned to recognize that sound immediately and learned to fear it. We've all heard the stories of Hitler's lawnmower machine gun, the terrifying sound, the insane rate of fire. Its effectiveness and reliability made it a part of many World War II stories. But we're not here today to repeat the same specs and nicknames. We're going to look at what it meant to be behind one of these guns and what eventually awaited the men who pulled the trigger on D-Day. German commanders believed the best way to stop an invasion was to crush it before it ever left the water. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, given command of coastal defenses in early 1944, said, "The war will be won or lost on the beaches. We'll have only one chance to stop the enemy, and that's while he's in the water, struggling to get ashore." And so they built fortified positions known as Widerstandsnester, resistance nests, all along the coast. They were placed carefully so each could cover the others with overlapping fire from cannons and machine guns. On Omaha Beach alone, there were 15 of these strong points, many set to fire down the length of the shoreline, enfilade fire. So any soldier who escaped one gun's line of fire would run straight into another's. A standard MG-42 crew was 3 men, a gunner to fire the weapon, an assistant gunner to feed fresh ammunition belts and swap barrels when they overheated, and 1 more man carrying extra ammunition. Many had combat experience from earlier campaigns, from Russia, from North Africa, from Italy. But by 1944, some crews were made up of younger replacements who had never been in a real fight, boys of 17 or 18. Conscripts from occupied territories, Volksdeutsche from Poland or the Baltic states. However, no matter their background, their job on that position was clear. And on the morning of D-Day, those jobs came down to one thing: keep firing until the beach was clear or die behind the gun trying. What most of them didn't realize, though, was that the same weapon that made them so feared would also make them priority targets. Knowing what was waiting for them, Allied planners prepared themselves by mapping the coastline and spotting strong points and gun emplacements hidden in the bluffs. Intelligence officers marked many so-called resistance nests by number and location: WN-60, WN-61, WN-62, each one cataloged, each one targeted. The plan was very neat on paper. The bombers and naval artillery would obliterate fortifications, and the landing troops would mop up what was left. However, in reality, many of those guns would still be firing when the ramps went down. The naval bombardment that morning was massive. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers opened up before dawn, shelling the entire coastline lined with known fortifications. The USS Texas, HMAS Warspite, USS Arkansas, 6 battleships, 23 cruisers, over 100 destroyers, thousands of shells pounded the beaches and bluffs. The noise was deafening, the explosions visible from miles away. However, reinforced concrete bunkers resisted even direct artillery hits, resulting in many nests surviving almost untouched. German soldiers inside knew that something big was happening. The bombardment was unlike anything they'd experienced. The ground shook. Dust filled the bunkers. Some men couldn't hear for hours afterward, and when they finally took a look outside, they had quite a sight before them. Hundreds of Allied landing craft approaching the beaches. At WN-62, the strongest point above Omaha Beach, 20-year-old Gefreiter Heinz Severlo looked out and couldn't believe what he saw. The sea was black with ships, he later recalled. There were so many I couldn't count them. I knew we were about to die. While the British and Canadians had special tanks called Hobart's Funnies, helping them clear and destroy bunkers that survived the initial bombardment, the Americans had horrible problems with their armor that was supposed to support ground troops on Omaha Beach. Their solution was supposed to be duplex drive tanks, DD tanks, Shermans with flotation screens that could swim ashore. But out of 32 launched in the first wave, 27 sank. Only 5 made it to the beach. Of those, just 3 were still able to fight, and even they were knocked out quickly. This turned the fight to silence the surviving machine gun nests into a bloodbath. And you can guess what the survival odds were on both sides. For the Allied infantry, facing an MG-42 was absolute horror. Many of the soldiers in the first wave were fresh out of training and had never been under real fire. Long before they saw the beach, they could already hear the weapon's distinctive rattle, that tearing, continuous sound. Veterans later admitted the sound alone could freeze your blood, leave you rooted to the spot like a deer caught in headlights. When the landing craft ramps dropped, the instinct was to hit the sand and stay there. One U.S. squad leader recalled yelling at his men to keep moving if they want to live. It was the only way to shake them out of the paralysis under a rain of bullets. But across that broad open shoreline, every man knew he was fully exposed to heavy fire. Army medic Ray Lambert later remembered how rounds were slicing through the water and hitting men who were already struggling in the surf. "I saw men cut in half by machine gun fire," Lambert said. "I saw men with no faces. I saw things I still can't talk about." Some units barely made it ashore at all. At Dog Green Sector, Company A of the 116th Infantry Regiment took nearly 90% casualties within minutes. Of the 200 men who landed, only about 20 made it off the beach unwounded. And yet amid the chaos, men still pushed forward, some because of orders, some because of duty, some simply because stopping meant dying where they lay. The sights, once those guns opened up, were so disturbing that they're still talked about to this day. What significantly increased the effectiveness of German MG crews were the tactics they had applied. One common one was what they called mowing the grass. They often aimed low to hit legs and knock soldiers down. Wounded men would then draw medics and friends trying to help, which meant more targets for the gunner and more casualties for the enemy. Different types of tricks were used, and surprisingly, many of them worked. For example, one gun might fire tracer rounds high, making it look like the shots were off target, while another hidden gun fired at the real killing height. It was a simple tactic, but it fooled enough soldiers to get them killed, and it caught plenty of them off guard. Another tactic: hold fire until the beach was crowded. Let the first wave land. Let them bunch up. Then open fire and maximize casualties. Once the first waves hit the beach, textbook plans fell apart, and casualties were mounting fast. Small groups of soldiers began to move on their own initiative, using whatever cover they could find. On an open beach, however, options were very limited. Tank traps, shell holes, even the dead were used as cover. Allied training had warned them to attack during the MG-42's brief pauses for reloading or barrel changes, and some officers yelled for men to sprint forward in those few precious seconds. One sergeant gathered a small team in a bazooka to take on WN-61, a strong point pouring fire across the sand. They destroyed a 50mm anti-tank gun supporting the machine guns first, then pushed up to silence the MG-42 gunners one by one. In close fighting around the bunkers, they killed 7 defenders and destroyed 2 gun positions, all while losing just 1 man and having 1 wounded in the process. That single action eased the pressure on that part of the beach and opened a path inland. However, all across Omaha, rangers, engineers, and infantrymen inched forward under fire for hours, desperately trying to reach the bunkers. At WWII, rangers stormed a strong point under smoke and silenced its guns. On Easy Red Sector, engineers cleared obstacles and opened a path for troops to climb the bluffs and outflank the gunners that held them pinned down for hours. But reaching a machine gun bunker was only half the job. The real fight happened in the seconds after. When assault teams finally reached an MG-42 nest, they threw grenades and satchel charges to silence them, then proceeded to shoot any survivors. Once they got close enough, flamethrowers would burn the bunkers down and neutralize the nest. The combat was brutal. Close quarters, no mercy on either side. After finally breaking through and taking over the beach, some German gunners, wounded or out of ammunition, finally surrendered. But having caused so many casualties to the Allies and with adrenaline pumping through the roof, not everybody's surrender was accepted. This is where the story gets dark, where the rules of war collided with the reality of combat. The Geneva Convention was clear. Prisoners were to be treated humanely. Surrendering soldiers were protected. But theory and practice are different things, especially when you've just watched your friends die, when you've seen men cut in half, when you're standing in blood and bodies. Some MG-42 gunners were shot on sight, killed as they tried to surrender, killed in revenge for what they'd done. Was it legal? No. Was it understandable? That's a harder question. By early afternoon, the tide had turned. Pockets of U.S. infantry and engineers had fought their way to the bluffs and knocked out or bypassed the remaining nests. An after-action report from Omaha said that the high ground was taken solely through the plain, undaunted heroism of the infantry and their engineers after the pre-landing bombardment had failed. Once the MG-42s were knocked out, the change was immediate. With the beach exits open, armor and reinforcements finally had a chance to move inland, and the German line lost the firepower it depended on most. The isolated secured positions were connected together, and the invasion rolled forward. German MG-42 crews fought on in Normandy's hedgerows, but never again in such concentrated positions, and never again with the chance to stop the Allied advance in a single day.